If this is your first experience with 3ds Max, I prepared this video so that you can get familiar with the software before you start the rendering process. Based on my experience, because I started with AutoCAD and ArchiCAD, I know how intimidating 3ds Max can be at a first glance. In this video, I will first explain to you the 3ds Max interface, then we will create and edit some basic shapes so that you can see how we use the Create and Modify tabs in the command panel. Then we will explore the transform commands, which we will be using a lot throughout the whole course, and by transform commands I mean the commands move, rotate and scale. And finally, we will see the various ways to save a project. Let's start. When we open 3ds Max, a welcome screen appears. It is a set of slides designed to provide new users with basic information to help get started. We won't be needing this screen, so go to the bottom left corner of this dialog box and disable Show this welcome screen at startup. If you want to reopen this screen, go to the menu Help and select Welcome Screen. When we close the welcome screen, we see the 3D Studio Max interface. It consists of the following: the title bar that shows the name of the project and the version of the 3ds Max that we are using. Every new project is named by default Untitled, and we need to save the project to rename it. This is the main toolbar, and it provides quick access to some of the most commonly used commands in 3ds Max, like undo, redo, or move, rotate, or scale, and so on. On the right side, we have the command panel, and we will be using this a lot. From this panel, we can create and modify elements. If we go to the bottom part of the interface, we have the status bar. On the left side, there is a two-line interface where we can create scripts and execute commands. Right next to it is the status line, which displays the number and type of objects selected, and below the status line is the prompt line, giving us instructions on what our next step should be. The coordinate display area shows the coordinates of the selected object. These are the viewport navigation controls, and they control the display and navigation of the viewports. Some of those buttons change depending on which viewport is active. These are the animation and time controls and the time slider, but in this course we will not explore any animation techniques. This is the V-Ray toolbar that gives us quick access to some of the most commonly used commands in V-Ray. And finally, these are the viewports. Everything in 3ds Max is located in a three-dimensional world that you view through one or more viewports. If we take a look at the various toolbars, we will see some small dots at the beginning of each toolbar. And if we move our cursor there, it changes appearance and we can click and drag the toolbars and reposition them in the 3ds Max interface. If we accidentally close a toolbar, we can come at an empty spot over here, right-click and choose from the pop-up menu the toolbar we want. So let's hide and unhide the command panel. When we open 3ds Max, there are by default 4 viewports displayed: top, front, left, and perspective. One of the viewports is marked with a highlighted border and is the active viewport. To make a viewport active, we simply click in it. If we press Alt and W, we maximize the active viewport, or we switch from one viewport back to the 4 viewports. Another way is to click on the Maximize Viewport toggle from the Viewport Navigation controls at the bottom right corner of the work environment. We can also resize the viewports if we drag the intersection of 2, 3, or 4 viewports. To return to the original layout, right-click on an intersection and choose Reset Layout. Each viewport contains a series of menus in the top left corner that controls the viewport display. The menus are General, and we use this menu to adjust general options for the viewport display and configuration. If we click on it, we can select to maximize and minimize a window. We can select which viewport we want to be active. Let's choose top, and now we are transferred to the top viewport. We can select to disable a viewport, also by pressing the D key on our keyboard. Then, any changes we make in our scene won't be visible in the disabled viewport. For you to understand this, let me disable the perspective viewport and quickly create a box. So we can see the box in all 3 windows, but not in the one we disabled. It's like we froze that window. If I click in the perspective window, now we can see it. If I go back to the top view and move the box, we can see it moving around in the 3 viewports, but not in the perspective viewport, which is disabled. Once we click in it, we see the new position of the box. I never really use this command, but it has happened to me several times to accidentally hit the D key, so be careful if you see disabled in any window, this means that it is frozen. Next command is the grid, where we can also simply click on the G key to hide or unhide the grid. I will explain the view cube and the steering wheels later on, so now let's move on to the configure viewports. If we go to the layout tab, we can choose a different layout for the viewports. Let me randomly pick this one. So once we choose a layout, we click in its box to assign from the menu what its viewport will display. Click OK for the changes to apply. Let me revert this back to its original look. Let's now move on to the next menu, which is the point of view. We use this menu to change the active point of view. So let's click on the left viewport and choose perspective. If we want to rotate in the viewport, hold Alt, hold the cursor and drag the mouse. Otherwise, use the orbit command from the navigation controls. Now you can see that in this perspective viewport, the box is displayed in a different way than in this perspective. So they are both called perspective, but the box is displayed differently. Why is that? Because of the last menu over here. This one says wireframe, which means that our object will be displayed as a wired object, just the edges, while this viewport is set to default shading. Let's click on wireframe and choose default shading. The default shading option allows us to see the color or texture our object has. From the options you see here, I use wireframe for the top view and the elevations and default shading for the perspective view and the camera viewports. Another option I use a lot is the edged faces, which let's say is a combination of wireframe and default shading. So in this case, we see the object with its color and the edges are also highlighted. I never really use the standard menu, so I will skip it. Finally, in the lower left corner of its viewport is visible the 3-color wall space tripod. The colors correspond to the 3 axes of wall space: red for X, green for Y, and blue for Z. The view cube is located at the top right corner of its viewport. It shows the orientation of the scene based on the north direction of the model. When we position the cursor over the view cube, it gets a white color. It becomes active. So what we see here is a box with the names top, front, left, right and back on its side, and if we click on them, the viewport adjusts to show that side of the scene. When we click on front, we don't switch to a front viewport. If you check here, it still says perspective. The scene rotates to a frontal perspective. If we click on the home button, we return to the original perspective view. At the bottom of this box, we see a circle with the 4 points of the horizon. So, if I click on south, I switch to a frontal perspective. If I click on the circle and hold the cursor, when I drag, then we rotate the perspective. You will notice that the orbit is restricted to the X and Y axis. We can't orbit it over the Z axis. But if we click and hold on the cube, then we have no restrictions on the orbit. To access the steering wheels, go to the menu Views, Steering Wheels, Toggle Steering Wheels. It moves along with the cursor and allows us to zoom, pan and orbit. The other commands have to do with the camera viewport, which we will explore in the cameras part. To be honest, I find the steering wheels quite annoying, so I never use it as a tool. If you don't want it, either click on the X button or press the Escape key. In this video, we will create some basic primitives and edit them. Let's start with a box. Go to the command panel, click on the first tab, Create, and below we see a row of categories we can create. We can choose between geometry, shapes, lights, cameras, helpers, space wraps, and systems. We will click on the first button, Geometry. Then there is a drop-down menu with different types of geometry we can create. We want the standard primitives, and here we can see the various standard primitives. Click on Box. Go to the top view, click anywhere, hold the cursor and drag it. A rectangle is created, which is the base of our box. Now leave the cursor and drag upwards or downwards. While you do that, check the other viewports and you will see the box. Click to complete the design process. The box we just created has random dimensions. To specify them, go to the Modify tab, the second button in the command panel. In order to see the box's dimensions here, the box must be selected. If you click anywhere in the viewport, the box gets deselected. And then you see nothing in the Modify tab. To select the box, simply click on it. So if we want the box to be 50 centimeters on its side, go to the length, width and height fields and type 50. Go to the navigation's controls at the bottom right corner of the work environment and click on the Zoom Extensor Selected command. This command zooms the selected object in the viewports. Let's now create another standard primitive, a sphere. First, go to the top view and zoom out to create some space for the sphere. And also holding the cursor down, you enable the pan command, so move the box, the viewport, slightly to the right. Go to the Create tab and choose Sphere. Go to the top view, click, hold and drag, and when you leave it, the sphere is created. As before, the sphere now has a random size. And to specify the radius of the sphere, go to the Modify tab and let's type 25 centimeters. If we click on the Zoom Extensor Selected command, now the sphere gets centered in all viewports. If we want both the box and the sphere to get centered, then click and hold on the Zoom Extensor Selected command, and choose Zoom Extends All. So now, all of the objects zoom in and not only the selected ones. To select an object, click on the Select an Object command from the main toolbar and then click on the object you want to select. Another way is to click on the Select by Name command, and in this case, the Select from Scene dialog box appears that shows all the objects of the scene in alphabetical order. If we click on the box and press OK, the box gets selected. To open the Select from Scene dialog box, we can also press the H key on our keyboard. Up here you see some icons, and they are the same icons we see in the Create tab. They allow us to narrow down our research. So, when they are all enabled, all the elements of the scene will be visible here. Let's disable them. And now nothing is visible. If we click on geometry, then it will only show us the elements of the scene that are geometry. If we only enable the cameras, then it will only show the cameras in the scene. Sorry, I know this is not very clear right now since we only have created geometry, but just so that I'm sure you understand it, let's close this. Go to the Create tab, go to Cameras, choose Physical, and go to the top view, click, hold and drag, and where you leave it, the target is placed. So now we created the camera. Moreover, go to the lights, choose free light and click in the top view. Now we also created the free light. So now, if we press H, if only the cameras button is enabled, we only see the cameras here. If we also enable lights, here is our light. Let's enable geometry and so on. This is really helpful because in your final scene you will actually have hundreds of objects, several cameras and several lights, so when you narrow down your research by categories, it's easier to find what you want. Using the Select Object command, select the light and hit the Delete button. Then select the camera and press Delete. When we select an element, its edges get a white color so that we can easily identify it over the other elements of the scene. Also, an X, Y, and Z system appears at the center of the selected object. When we create anything in 3ds Max, it is automatically named by the software. To see the name, select your object and check the name and color field in the command panel. We can type here the name we want. I will make this box. Next to the name, we see a color field. We can click and select the desired color. The color is not a material. In the materials part of this course, we thoroughly go through how to create and apply materials. The color you see here defines basically the 2D representation of the object. So if I make this red, now the box edges will appear red in the viewports. When we select an object, let's go to the top view and select the box. If we want to activate another viewport, let's say the perspective, if we click in the perspective view, our object gets deselected. So how can we activate a viewport while keeping our selection? We need to right-click in the new viewport. So let's select again the box and right-click in the other viewports. Now the box remains selected. Let's activate the perspective viewport and maximize it. Either press Alt-W or the Maximize Viewport button from the viewport controls. To orbit in the viewport, we have already seen several ways to do that, but let's repeat them here one more time. We can either hold the Alt key, hold the cursor and move around, or we can enable the orbit command from the viewport controls, or we can use the view cube. And now we are ready to move on to the transform commands. When I say transform commands, I am referring to the select and move, select and rotate, and select and scale commands. Although this course only covers rendering techniques and not modeling, these commands are crucial to prepare a scene for rendering, and that is the reason we explore them. As its name states, the select and move command is used to select and move objects. To activate the command, go to the main toolbar and click on the select and move command. Or select an object, right-click and choose move from the quad menu. Another way is to hit the W key on your keyboard. Or finally, go to the menu Edit and choose Move. When we select an object and activate the Select and Move command, we see the axis placed at the center of the object. If we click on the red arrow that represents the x-axis and drag the cursor, we move our object and the movement is constrained to the x-axis. Now, click on the y-axis and you will see that the movement is now constrained to the y-axis. And same goes for the z-axis and the blue color. Apart from the red, green and blue arrows, we also see some planes. This one over here has a red-green color, and if we click on it and drag, we can move our object over the x and y axis. If we click on the blue and green plane, we constrain the movement to the x and z axis. And finally, if we click on the green and blue plane, we constrain the movement to the x and z axis. Up until now, we were randomly moving the selected object. If we want to move the box 50 cm to the right, then we need to use the coordinates fields in the status bar. More specifically, enable the select and move command, select the box and go to the X field. These fields show the current location of the box. Instead of doing the math here and trying to add 50 cm to this value, we can simply click on this button, absolute mode, and now the fields change to 0, and we can type in 50, press enter, and the box moves 50 cm to the right. Once we press enter, the value gets again 0. If I click this button, which now is named offset mode, I return to the initial measurement of the coordinates. In the offset mode, 0 is set to the center of the grid, while in the absolute mode, the 0 is set to the center of the selected object. To rotate an object, we will use the select and rotate command from the main toolbar. When we enable this command, we see various colored circles at the center of the object. If we click on a circle and drag the cursor up or down, we rotate the object along the circle. The active circle gets a yellow color. As before, we can set a specific orbit of the selected object by using the transform type in fields. So, if we type 45 in the Z field, the box will rotate by 45 degrees. Lastly, we have the select and scale command. Go to the top view and select the box. If we click on the red arrow, we scale the box along the x-axis, and if we click on the green arrow, we scale it along the y-axis. Moreover, we see two triangles, a highlighted yellow one and an outline yellow. If we click and drag on the highlighted yellow, then we scale the box over the X, Y and Z axis simultaneously. So please also check the perspective view while you are transforming your object. If we now click and drag on the outlined yellow triangle, then we scale the box over the x and y axis simultaneously, but the z axis remains the same. If we want to scale the selected object, let's say by 50%, then we will use the absolute mode transform type in fields. Type 50 and press enter. The box gets half in size. But what I need you to be careful of here is that when we use the scale command, if we now go to the modify tab, it still shows us the box like it's 50 centimeters, which is wrong because we have scaled it. Unfortunately, those fields don't get updated as we use the scale command. So my advice is that when you want to check the dimensions of a selected object, don't use the modify tab, but select your object, go to the command panel, choose utilities and click on measure. Here you can see the dimensions of the selected object. When we start working on a new project, it is automatically named by the software Untitled. To rename it, we need to save it. To save a project, go to the menu File and choose Save. In the Save File As dialog box, type in the desired name, let's say Test, and choose the destination folder. I will choose Desktop. So now our project is saved, and up here in the title bar we can see the new name. I would strongly advise you, while you are working on a project, to keep saving it pretty often, especially when you work with heavy files with many polygons, so that you won't have any unpleasant surprises and, let's say, 3ds Max crashes and you lose your progress. If I now go to File Save, the Save File As dialog box doesn't appear since we have already named this project, and we just save the progress of our file. I have now opened the scene we were working on lately. I'm sure you know the save as command from other applications, but let me quickly go through this as well. The save as command allows us to save our project under a different name, or in a different location, or in a different version. More specifically, go to the menu File and choose Save As. The Save File As dialog box appears, and I can go to my desktop, name this 2017, and from the Save Type As field, I can choose the 2017 version. This way, we can share our files with users who have an earlier version of 3ds Max. We can save only up to a 3 times previous version than the one we are currently working on. Save Copy As is pretty similar to the Save As command. Save Copy As is pretty similar to the Save As command. When we click on Save Copy As, the Save File As dialog box appears. The software automatically renames our file, adding a sequence number next to the name of our project, but we can come and rename it. As before, we can choose the destination and the version. But now, once we press the Save button, we return to the project we were working on, and not the version we just saved. So, let's say that with the Save Copy As command we create backup files. That's how I use it at least. From time to time, I hit the Save Copy As to create backup files, so if anything goes wrong with the file I'm working on, I can go back and pick a saved version. The Save Selected is a command I use a lot, and that's because in my projects I often use the same objects or the same accessories. The Save Selected command allows us to save only the selected object. So, for instance, I use these curtains a lot in my project, so what we can do is select the curtains, go File, Save Selected, rename it to Curtains, and press Save. I also use the switches in every project, so I will do the same. Now, a separate file is created that contains only the selected objects. This one has the curtains and this one has the switches. Every time I need these items for a new project, I can merge them from these Max files. Archive is a really important command which basically allows us to move our file from one computer to another or exchange our files. We have said in the past that when we work in 3ds Max with textures, IES files, external references and so on, 3ds Max recognizes the path we set. And this path can be found if we go to File, Reference, Asset Tracking. If we change the location of any of those files or of our project, and so if we change this path, then it will no longer render properly. Archive creates a compressed archive file that contains the scene file and any other files referenced by it, the textures, IES, XREF and so on. Let's try it and go to File, Archive. Give it some time and a DOS screen will appear. Once it disappears, the archive is created. Let's go to the desktop or the destination you saved it. Here it is. And if we open it, we see the .max file plus folders that contains the maps we have used. The archive is really helpful, but I find it quite annoying, all these folders one inside the other till you find your texture. And that's the reason I use a script to create my archives. I use the collect asset, which you can find here. Script spot, collect asset. To install it, go to the menu Scripting and choose Run Script and select the collect asset. And you're all done. Here, it also shows us the next steps. We need to go to the menu Customize, Customize User Interface, go to Toolbars, and from the category, choose this one. Now, we need to create a new toolbar. So I will click here on the New button. And here it is. I will drag it to dock it to the side. And now I will click on the Collect Asset and drag it on the new toolbar I created. And we are now ready to use it. Click on Collect Asset. Go to the selected directory and click on the three dots button to choose the destination folder. I will create a folder on my desktop. When the relink to selected directory option is enabled, then the path of this project will also change and update to the one we are creating now on the desktop. If I also enable copy.max file, I create a copy of our max file in the same folder. Click on the Collect button and the saving process starts. We are all set. Click OK and let's go to the desktop. So here is our max file and the max we have used. And now you see how clearer it is. We no longer have folders and subfolders and so on. The necessary info is placed in one folder. So now, when you want to send this into someone, you zip this folder and send it. That's all on how to save your project in 3ds Max. Thanks for watching. I will see you all in my next video.